They say history is written in moments when the whole world seems to hold its breath. Tonight feels like one of those moments. The lights of Gaza flicker under a tense sky, the streets whisper of uncertainty, and across the globe, leaders sit in rooms filled with maps, strategy papers, and the silent weight of decisions that could reshape the future. The question everyone is asking is not just what will happen next, but whether we are standing at the edge of a decisive turning point that the next generation will study as a lesson in power, resistance, and the fragility of peace. In the heart of the Middle East, a major operation is unfolding. Israel's leadership has announced a plan to take control of Gaza City, citing security imperatives and the need to dismantle what they describe as entrenched militant networks. In the public statements, the language is firm, the mission defined. Gaza City, home to hundreds of thousands, is not merely a place on a map. It is a symbol of decades of unresolved conflict, failed diplomacy, and human suffering. This is not just a military maneuver. It's a move layered with political risk, international scrutiny, and humanitarian concerns. The Israeli government frames the plan as a necessary action after repeated rocket attacks and what it calls ongoing threats to its citizens. Officials argue that allowing these conditions to persist is not an option. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who, facing intense pressure at home and abroad, has declared that Israel will act decisively to ensure the safety of our people and the stability of our region. The words are resolute, intended to project strength and determination both to his own citizens and to those watching from foreign capitals. But outside Israel's borders, reactions are anything but unified. In Washington, President Donald Trump, now in his second term, has reiterated America's support for Israel's right to defend itself while urging restraint to avoid civilian casualties. In his remarks to reporters, he emphasized the importance of minimizing loss of innocent life, but made clear that Israel remains a close ally whose security is a priority for the United States. This careful balance between support and caution reflects the complex alliance politics that define U.S. policy in the region. Meanwhile, in Moscow, President Vladimir Putin has adopted a more critical stance. The Kremlin warns that a full-scale takeover of Gaza City risks igniting a broader regional conflict, with spillover effects into neighboring territories and potentially destabilizing areas where Russian influence is deeply invested. Putin's message is blunt. The region does not need another war front, and all parties must consider the long-term consequences over short-term military gains. Across the Mediterranean, French President Emmanuel Macron has taken to international media to urge immediate dialogue. Paris, while recognizing Israel's security concerns, argues that any military action must be part of a larger framework for peace. Macron has proposed convening an emergency summit under the auspices of the European Union, bringing together Israeli and Palestinian representatives alongside regional stakeholders in an attempt to broker a diplomatic pause before the situation escalates beyond control. In Beijing, Chinese President Xi Jinping has expressed grave concern over the potential humanitarian fallout. China's message is measured but pointed, calling for a ceasefire and offering to mediate talks. This reflects Beijing's growing interest in positioning itself as a global diplomatic player, particularly in regions where U.S. influence has traditionally been dominant. For China, the Gaza situation is both a crisis and an opportunity, a chance to showcase its role as a peacemaker while protecting its economic and political interests in the Middle East. On the ground in Gaza, the atmosphere is tense, almost electric. Families gather around radios and televisions, listening to updates, unsure of what tomorrow will bring. Humanitarian organizations warn that any large-scale operation could displace tens of thousands, with shortages of food, medicine, and clean water becoming acute within days. The UN has called for safe corridors to allow civilians to evacuate, but both sides accuse each other of obstructing such efforts. The humanitarian dimension of this conflict is already a focal point for global public opinion, and images of crowded hospitals and makeshift shelters are beginning to circulate widely. In Tel Aviv, the military's preparations are visible. Convoys of armored vehicles move toward staging areas, and soldiers, many of them young, stand ready. The official line is that the operation will be swift and targeted. But in military affairs, such assurances are rarely guarantees. Veteran analysts point out that urban warfare in densely populated areas like Gaza City is among the most difficult and unpredictable forms of combat. The history of past operations in similar environments is filled with lessons, some learned, others painfully repeated. The Arab world's reaction is equally significant. In Amman, King Abdullah II of Jordan has condemned the planned takeover, warning that it could lead to a dangerous and irreversible collapse of stability. Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, while refraining from direct condemnation, has called for regional unity to prevent further escalation. The Gulf states are caught in a delicate balancing act, maintaining relations with Israel while responding to domestic public opinion that overwhelmingly sympathizes with the Palestinian cause. Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has been one of the most vocal critics, accusing Israel of violating international law and warning of severe consequences if the operation proceeds. Erdogan's rhetoric plays well to his domestic base and positions Ankara as a leading voice in the Muslim world, though its ability to influence the situation directly remains limited. Beyond regional capitals, the global stage is watching closely. The United Nations Security Council has convened an emergency session, with diplomats trading accusations and urging restraint. The tone in the chamber is familiar, statements of concern, calls for dialogue, but the urgency is palpable. The fear is not only of a humanitarian crisis, but of a spark that could ignite wider hostilities, potentially involving Lebanon, Syria, or even Iran. Inside Gaza, the city's labyrinth of narrow streets and densely packed buildings presents a daunting challenge for any advancing force. Analysts note that Hamas and other militant groups have spent years preparing for such a scenario, building an extensive network of tunnels and fortified positions. This means that any Israeli push into the heart of the city could meet fierce resistance, turning the operation into a prolonged and costly campaign. The potential for high casualties on both sides raises the stakes considerably. At the same time, Israeli civilians living near the Gaza border are bracing for an increase in rocket fire. The Iron Dome defense system remains on high alert, intercepting incoming projectiles, but the psychological toll on residents, especially children, is undeniable. For them, the sound of sirens and the dash to shelters have become an unwelcome rhythm of life. Economic factors are also in play. Markets in the region are reacting cautiously, with energy prices ticking upward amid fears of disruption to key shipping routes and pipelines. Investors are wary of a conflict that could spill over into major oil, producing states or impact the Suez Canal, a vital artery for global trade. Back in Israel, the debate is intense. Supporters of the operation argue that decisive action now could neutralize threats for years to come, strengthening national security and deterring future attacks. Critics counter that military solutions alone cannot resolve the underlying issues and warn that the costs, human, financial, and diplomatic, could outweigh the benefits. The Israeli public is no stranger to such debates, and the coming days are likely to see passionate arguments on all sides. For the Palestinian leadership in the West Bank, the Israeli plan represents both a political and humanitarian crisis. President Mahmoud Abbas has appealed to the international community for immediate intervention, accusing Israel of collective punishment and urging foreign governments to apply diplomatic pressure. This is a moment that tests the Palestinian Authority's relevance, as its ability to influence events in Gaza remains limited. As the situation develops, smaller nations are also finding their voices. Norway, long a mediator in Middle Eastern peace efforts, has called for renewed talks based on the Oslo Accords framework. South Africa has compared the situation to its own history of apartheid, drawing sharp criticism from Israeli officials. Even nations far from the conflict, like Brazil and Argentina, are weighing in, reflecting the truly global resonance of this crisis. There is also the question of timing. Some observers suggest that Israel's move is influenced by the broader geopolitical climate, shifts in U.S. policy, regional realignments, and the approaching UN General Assembly session, where debates over Palestine's status are expected to take center stage. In this view, the operation is not only a military action, but also a strategic message to allies and adversaries alike. In the streets of Gaza City, that kind of analysis feels distant. For the people living there, the reality is immediate. The uncertainty of whether the next knock on the door will be a neighbor, an aid worker, or the arrival of soldiers. The tension in the air is heavy, almost tangible, as residents weigh impossible choices: stay and risk the dangers of urban warfare, or flee and face the hardships of displacement. In Israel's halls of power, the decisions being made are framed as defending the homeland, securing the future, and protecting the lives of citizens. That narrative resonates deeply with a society that has lived under the shadow of conflict for generations. For many Israelis, the idea of waiting passively for the next attack is unacceptable. They believe in taking control of their destiny, whatever the risks. And so, the stage is set. The next hours and days will determine whether this becomes a brief, controlled operation or spirals into a drawn-out conflict with consequences that echo far beyond the borders of Gaza. The world is watching, leaders are speaking, and history is once again being written in real time. In moments like this, one truth becomes clear: the Middle East remains one of the most volatile arenas on Earth, where decisions made in the name of security, justice, or peace can ignite events that change the course of nations. Whether this moment leads to resolution or further tragedy is a question that only time and the choices of those in power will answer. But tonight, as the city waits under a tense sky, we are reminded that in the balance between war and peace, it is the human cost that must never be forgotten.